Hey everyone, Carl here with Literate Lessons, bringing you another deep dive this week. This week we are looking at the meta from a glance here over the past weekend and a half of events, I would say. This is including Perth, Lille, Secaucus, and the Korean event that was, I think it was a best of one event, but we'll get into that here in a minute. Um, Overall, the format has started to become this more fluid, dynamic format rather than a solid, here's the X best teams kind of format. But before we get into all the nitty gritty there, make sure to do all that fun YouTube stuff for us. Hit the like button, ring the bell for notifications for when new videos go live, smash the subscribe button. Make sure to answer our question of the day, which is, I want to know what your current favorite comfort Pokemon is for VGC. It could be a comfort Pokemon, like comfort duo, a comfort team, if that's something you're into. I would love to hear that kind of stuff. My personal pick currently is anything Yveltal Grimmsnarl. It's a very strong duo in my opinion, and I think there's a lot unexplored with Yveltal in general, mainly due to the fact that there's some very powerful things that Yveltal doesn't do that great into, and so it makes it hard to explore some of these other restricted pairings. So we're going to start with the combined statistics here, which, as you can see, doesn't really look a whole lot different than what we've been seeing from the normal meta before this. A ton of Incineroar, a ton of Zacian, a ton of Kyogre, Rillaboom, Thundurus rounding out the top 5 here. There's Grimmsnarl, Whimsicott, Regieleki, so on and so forth. Looking at specifically teams, we see that Rinyasun has completely disappeared off the map. Not really surprised. The format has definitely adapted to Rinyasun. There are very strong matchups to it now. Specifically, like anything with like Calyrex Shadow can be definitely hard for Rinyasun to deal with. The Swordfish variants have adapted really well to it, and so it's kind of been pushed out of the format now that everybody's figured out all of its tricks. That being said, there is always a vacuum when a big team like Rinyasun leaves the format, and that's kind of where our Kyogre screens, bulky stuff has come back into play. As you can see here, the most popular team is seen 8 times across all the events, tops cuts. Kyogre, Zacian, Incineroar, Rillaboom, Grimmsnarl, Zapdos. And there's variations of this team across other events. I believe in NA we favor Thundurus more than Zapdos, which you can see here. Zapdos isn't even on this thing, which when we get into more of our regional metas, when we talk about those, it'll make a lot more sense on why this is a thing. But overall, I'm not surprised to see Screens Ogre doing so well. It's always done decently well into Rinyasun, decently well into blind matchups like that, and overall it makes sense to be the number 1 team again. Looking at other things besides Swordfish here, the third most popular team from this weekend was Calyrex Ice Reshiram, which is very surprising because I don't think I saw a single Calyrex Ice Reshiram in any of the regionals events, so it must be something from the Korean event. Is the only thing I could think of, because we know Alex Underhill and Justin Burns played Calyrex Ice Palkia to great success at Secaucus, and then there was no Calyrex finishes in Perth, no Calyrex finishes really in Lille, so we didn't really see any of that, and so it leads me to believe that maybe Korea's a little bit behind our formats. Maybe they favor this kind of play style more than us. I'm not sure. And then the last big thing here, obviously, is Calyrex Shadow and Zacian. That's been our hyper offensive format of team of this format for the most part. Now that Kyogre has gone away from Mystic Water Tail and stuff, and has kind of become this more bulky attacker that can Dynamax, we definitely see the hyper offensive teams playing with Calyrex Shadow and trying to just blow people up. In the case of this one, again, there's another variant in NA. Oh goodness, playing Rillaboom instead of Whimsicott, which I believe this is more of a personal preference thing. We're not so worried about speed control here because we rely on max airstream. There's more trick room running around, so it makes sense to see that NA's format is not as tailwind reliant as, say, let's see here. Is Whimsicott? Whimsicott had 10 in the top 32 at Lille. And I think Whimsicott is 5, like half that number at Secaucus, which is very interesting when you look at that kind of stuff. So let's talk about region specific. Overall, you when you look online, say at Pikalytics or Showdown Ladder or anything like that, that's more of a global format because everyone can play on the same Showdown server regardless really of where you're at. You're going to play against people from Europe, you're going to play against people from Asia, so on and so forth. That's one of the cool things about the power of the internet. But inside that global meta, there's regional metas that can help you prepare for your next event. We talked a little bit about this on the Discord a couple days ago about preparing for best of 3, just like trying to get good practice in, maybe not using ladder so much as your metric of how well your team actually is going to perform, because best of 1 ladder is a weird amalgamation of gimmick teams and catchy, tricky things. And so looking at regional metas from these kind of events will help you prepare for your next regionals. Unless there is a very big breakout team outside of a area or region in this case, usually the formats stay fairly standardized across multiple events like this. Looking at Perth here, we have Yveltal's very, very popular here, whereas Yveltal's not very popular anywhere else. With that being said, as popular as Yveltal is, you see that Zacian is one of the more common pairings with a lot of these restricteds. That just kind of goes to show that they like the Zacian pairings. They play a little bit more of a more offensive based game. There's no trick room really running around. Groudon's real popular, Charizard's real popular, Kyogre's popular, Palkia's popular, and that kind of shows with the rest of what they're playing. Which is surprising more so than anything that Kyogre isn't in the top 5 like it is in Lille or in NA, like as we see here. 14 of the top 32 in Secaucus, and then 16 of the top 32 in Lille. Like, that's insane numbers for Kyogre. Being a very, like, I would call it restricted Pokemon in the sense that you play Kyogre with certain Pokemon around it, and the fact that it's half means that it's doing really, really well in this case. In the case of Lille, you have this really cool team that the French players have innovated on, using like Shedinja and Kartana and Thundurus over the standard Rillaboom, Grimmsnarl, Zapdos that we in NA have been used to seeing. Speaking of the NA meta, so when you're looking to, like I said, when you're playing teams, there's regional metas within the global meta. Like if you go and look at Pikalytics data, it's going to be the standard Showdown stuff. It's going to have everything for you, and it won't necessarily match your metas at your current events. You can use Secaucus here as a very good example. Calyrex Ice is something that's very, very popular in NA, whereas it's not as popular in other places. In this situation here, Alex Underhill's Palkia Calyrex Ice team, it's gaining a lot of attention, a lot of steam. Technically, Calyrex Ice Palkia was one of the most popular restricted pairs at this event for Top Cut. I know Paul Chua had a Calyrex Ice Palkia team. There was the 2 with Alchemy Gothitelle, and then there was one more. I can't remember who was playing it. But that kind of affects how our meta goes. As you see, there's definitely a lot less Yveltal, there's less Landorus, there's less Groudon. We don't see Charizard's not even on this list. We have Groudon on here, but Charizard's nowhere to be seen. Unlike Perth or Lille that have Charizard on here and usually are pairing with Groudon. What this tells me here is that Groudon's paired with Venusaur and Charizard a lot here in Lille, whereas in Secaucus, we're not pairing them together all the time. Yes, there were Charizard, Groudon, Venusaur teams Santino was playing a very good variation of Austin Acosta's version from Indy, and I'm sure other people were playing that kind of version too. But it just kind of shows that not all the people are going to play the same style of Pokemon in regional stuff like this. And it's kind of interesting to just approach this from being one step up, moving one step down. In this situation, going from global to regional can definitely change your viewpoint on what your meta you need to prepare for is. This brings us to the main topic of discussion here: is how are you to approach this meta, this pinnacle of VGC right now? Because we have reached the point of where if you play the team enough, you will probably do well in an event. It's not so much your matchups against specific teams, more so than just practicing with your team and getting better with it. This is where comfort comes in. Things that you know how to play, things that you've played maybe in previous series that you liked. In the case of, like I said, Austin Acosta's team, he liked the Series 8 Groudon plus Charizard plus Venusaur plus Grimmsnarl thing. That was something that he liked, and so he iterated on that, and he took it to a top 4 finish. He had played with it forever and ever, and it's a great example of what this format is becoming. We never really, newer Sword and Shield players have never really gotten to see a format do this. Coming from a Magic background, I used to see this happening all the time. Decks that were popular would rise and fall like the tide as people adapted and adjusted to beat certain things, and then your deck would become worse. Well, then as nobody saw it and saw other decks being played, they would side and prepare for that, and then your deck would get better. And it kind of happens, the ebb and flow here in Pokemon. Most of the time our formats only last 3 months, and well, we've reached the end of we're reaching the end of month 3, and we still have 3 more months of this at least. And it's exciting to see that the format is going to continue to adapt and flux and change like that over the course of, I believe, till the end of August for sure. So what this means for your team building is, in this situation, I would find a team and I would stick with it. I wouldn't really go out and try to reinvent the wheel at this point anymore. There are a lot of very good standardized teams that you can start with, and then maybe switch a couple Pokemon to fit your playstyle a little bit, and I go from there. The greatest example I have is going from Z's Yveltal Zacian team with Amoonguss, Double Intimidate, and Regieleki to the team I was going to bring to Indy, which is this Dialga Yveltal team here. I had started with the Yveltal Zacian plan. I had worked really, really hard on trying to figure out the best way to do this. I swapped around some Pokemon. I was playing with like Whimsicott for speed control. I was playing with Grimmsnarl for like screens and stuff. And we ended up with this unique build of Dialga Yveltal. And so this is where your comfort comes into play. I'm very comfortable with Yveltal Grimmsnarl. I had a lot of reps with that. I unfortunately didn't bring this team like I wanted to because I had no real good practice with Dialga, and I wasn't super duper confident with it, so I ended up playing something else entirely. But I still think that this team fits the best example of what I'm trying to explain here, on being set up to be generally good rather than specifically good. It's good to know your matchups, and it's good to kind of have that planned out ahead of time, but you want to be great in the blind. You want to be able to have something that your team can do and commit to that, at least maybe in game 1. Game 2, you might be able to want to pivot maybe to a more standardized level of gameplay, maybe not have to bring your gimmick, but definitely want to be able to do your thing at this point, because that's kind of where the format is heading. If you look at examples of like Calyrex Ice and Palkia, Reshiram, they're very much do the thing game 1, and then once you figured out how your opponent reacts to it, you get to change how you play the game in order to throw them off, essentially. They have to respect the way you played the game one, and so they may have to overcommit or make a hard read that they normally wouldn't have to make in a game two situation, and then you can call them on that and get ahead that way. In this case, if we take this example here, my gimmick was Grimmsnarl with Fake Tears using Dialga and Yveltal and Alecki to just deal massive damage to people. Most Pokemon don't survive anything at -2 in special defense. It's pretty hard to do that. And so, depending on their team and depending on what we needed to lead, we would use Dialga, Yveltal, and Alecki to kind of just abuse that fact. And then we had the specific weakness to Zacian, so we played Landorus and Volcarona to kind of help supplement that weakness. And overall, I think this team is great. I'll probably post the paste down and below if you guys want to play with something silly like this. It's a very good best of one ladder team, I'll tell you that right now. Nobody expects Fake Tears. Nobody expects Fake Out Grimmsnarl. You can definitely catch people off guard with that very easily. In this best of 3 format, it's definitely going to be harder to play, I think, because it's more my play style than the average player. And it harkens back to playing with what you're comfortable with. So let's take a meta team and turn it into something a little bit different here. Like we said before, Rinya Sun is kind of gone off the face of the planet. It's not something you see much anymore, but the core of this team is still strong. There are still things you can play with it to kind of supplement your team here. And in this situation, I think, like if you wanted to take Rinya Sun and make it more comfortable for my sake, I would drop this as Zacian and maybe drop this Grimmsnarl, and you could play a different restricted and a different maybe a different support Pokemon, or even add an extra offensive Pokemon in this slot here. In my case, I think playing with exactly maybe Lunala and do something similar to what Wolfie was doing with this core, because this Formon core here is the good part of this team. It's the meta part of this team. And what you want to start doing in your team building now is probably taking your good, strong cores and maybe adapting them and changing them a little bit to fit your playstyle. So in this case, we'll take Lunala, obviously Power Herb, not Power Weight. Power Herb Lunala is one of the best things right now you can be doing, mainly due to the fact that Meteor Beam just OHKOs most Incineroars. You're immune to Fake Out. You're not getting OHKO'd unless they double up into you a lot of the times and break the Shadow Shield, so definitely keep an eye out for things like that. You also have really cool utility in like Wide Guard or Will-O-Wisp, so it depends on what you want to do. In this case, we're going to just play the standard Meteor Beam, Moongeist Beam, Trick Room, Protect. I'm not going to get too cute with this one just for right now. I'm just going to put some stats in places. I don't even know what our speed is, but ta-da, Merry Christmas. I don't know, but looking at like this team here, we do have a very good option for Trick Room now. And while we also still have to keep Gastrodon because we do have that Kyogre water weakness on 3 of our team, Lunala can definitely help, especially if you end up playing like Wide Guard. Being able to force that Kyogre into a position of I either have to max Hailstorm or max Lightning, or never click a water move again because you have Wide Guard and Gastrodon, means that Kyogre's not going to be doing its job on the team, and you're going to be able to capitalize on that. I've seen a lot of people playing Lunaludon with like Venusaur, and I think that's just kind of silly. You don't really need to be doing that anymore. You definitely want to be doing more Charizard things because you already have to rely, as you saw in the laddering video this week, you already have to rely on Venusaur hitting Sleep Powder, Venusaur hitting Leaf Storm, Groudon hitting Precipice Blades, Groudon hitting Rock Slide. Lunala Meteor Beam isn't even 100% accurate, so definitely I think having Charizard over Venusaur in this situation helps your consistency out a ton. As for your last slot here, you don't really need a ton of support because you do have this Incineroar, you do have Gastrodon. You have strong Dynamax targets in Charizard, Groudon, and Lunala, and so what you would probably want to do is find a comfort pick that you like, something that you can bring to games that's going to help you in certain matchups. For the case of Lunala, you're weak to Dark. You have weak to Dark and Ghost. You have Incineroar, which kind of helps that a little bit, but you could also just play Urshifu. If I could type. Like, you could just play Urshifu in this last slot with Focus Sash or Choice Band and just call it a day. And if that's something you're comfortable playing with, that's fine. I've seen people play Umbreon in this slot. I've seen people play just random dark types, whatever. But having that Calyrex Shadow answer is good. Your answer to, like, Yveltal is playing Charizard because Yveltal can have a hard time against Charizard Groudon leads. You could also, just like I said, if you really want to beat up stuff, you can play Regieleki in this slot. And I believe this is something very similar to what Wolfie was doing. Focus Sash with just like E-Web and whatnot. Standard Aleki does standard Aleki things. Cool. Ta-da. And that's kind of how you want to probably approach your team building aspects. Is, like I said, find your core. Step one. Take your current, like, super heavy meta team and find your core. Then take that core and put it into a comfort zone that you like. If you like some of the core and not like part of it, then you can probably just take a little bit off of it, adjust it. That's where you're going to get your advantages, is when you know your team is better. When you know your team and you know your matchups better than your opponent. I'm going to emphasize this now. This is not an easy thing to understand. This is not an easy team building tip to do. This comes from practice, and just knowing how to team build really well. If I had to rate this on a beginner to like expert level scale, this is probably closer to an expert level skill. It's not so much the grabbing good things and putting them together situation. This is a very identifying weaknesses and applying what you know about VGC to that thing. And it goes back to doing the meta analysis, looking at your format, understanding, hey, this Pokemon is popular. My team is weakened to this Pokemon. One of my slots should probably help that matchup a little bit. But you also don't want to overstep and overcommit to that, because then you end up being worse to just being like blind teams, because you're not going to see most popular team number one every match. You may see it one time. You may not see it at all. That's the kind of mindset you want to be getting into as you go into Vancouver regionals, as you go into Milwaukee regionals, NAIC here and soon. Plan for certain archetypes, but don't try to specifically plan for anything anymore. Try to be more general when you are building your teams and looking at stuff like that. And that's all I got this week. I hope this has kind of opened your eyes a little bit to how the nuances of team building work, because the format is going to be in this flux format where it's going to shift and change very quickly because we're doing IRL events. You have to stay ahead. Whereas when we were just doing like laddering and whatnot, the format can get very stale very fast, because once you find something strong in a best of one format, there's not a whole lot you can really do to change it without reinventing the whole wheel, and you usually don't have time to do that. Again, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, answer our question of the day, all that fun YouTube stuff. Keep an eye out on Sunday for RTT. We are back on that. We had to take a week off because New Jersey was happening and Carter's opponent wasn't in town. We didn't have a backup plan ready for that, but we have that match ready to go now. It is a barn burner, I'll tell you that. It is very fast. But yeah, have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you're at in the world. Good luck to everyone playing in Vancouver this weekend, I believe. I believe Vancouver's this weekend. I can't remember. Time is an illusion to me anymore. But anywho, I will see you all on Monday for the podcast. Bye, everyone.